So, I had the privilege of being raised in a Christian household, and from a young age was introduced into the teachings of Christianity. I was acquainted with the well-known stories of the Bible and made aware of Jesus, who loved me and was my Savior. However, as I began to grow up, I know in my heart that I didn't fully grasp what it meant to believe in the Lord. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that how I felt about Christianity and Jesus was not my own personal story. I was comparing myself too much to what other Christians had experienced. I felt empty in my faith when the realization had occurred that I hadn't felt the same way that others were. I just couldn't relate. This uncertainty and doubt was only exacerbated when I went to college in 2009. There I met many mentors who based everything on what they believed with hard evidence and science. Many discounted any existence of a spiritual world. I was soon convinced religion was just a remnant of humanity's archaic past, and it was just a stumbling block for my own progression. Throughout college and into the first 3 years of my career, I lived life without a thought of faith or God. I was my own God. Then in 2015, everything came to a head. I was unhappy in my career and was struggling with anxiety and depression. On Christmas Eve 2015, I was called into work, which was not unusual on a holiday. It was an emergency according to my boss, and I had to be there despite my protests. Upon completion of the job, I began to drive home. I hit traffic, which at this point I was used to, but this traffic was exceptionally bad. Hours went by, and we haven't moved more than a mile. Around hour 4, I decided I wanted out of the situation. I reached my limit. I began speeding down the shoulder of the highway. I didn't know how far I drove, but I eventually came to a stop, put my car in park. I then screamed at God. I wasn't a bad person. I didn't deserve the depression and the anxiety and the job I hated and the fear. And at that moment, a box truck drove past me as I sat on the shoulder with the phrase, "Jesus saves" on it. Someone had scribbled it with their finger in the layers of dirt on the truck. I couldn't help but laugh. I still remember thinking to myself that it was just a coincidence, but something in my gut told me that it wasn't. I felt a peace I had not felt in a long time. After this experience, I quit my job and continued to press into my exploration of faith. I was making progress slowly. Doubts would come very often. Again, I continued to compare myself to others. Everyone seemed so sure, yet I continued to be uncertain. In 2016, I started a new job, and shortly thereafter met my now fiancée, Dottie, which in turn brought me here to Christ Church. In hindsight, God knew that I needed a companion with Dottie's personality to continually challenge and press me in my faith, and to stop me in my tracks when I was overthinking. Being extremely analytical was one of my greatest strengths. It's what made me good at my career, but it also was turning out to be my greatest weakness. I was still plagued with this notion that I was progressing too slowly in my faith, or progressing in the wrong ways, despite the fact that I was in fact progressing. In early 2018, I attended a men's conference at Covenant Fellowship in Westchester with Pastor Jeff and other men from our church. The speaker at the conference, Roy Ortland, said something that impacted me profoundly. It made me realize that my biggest hang-up on my journey of faith was not a hang-up at all. In fact, it was normal. There's no one-size-fits-all Christian conversion. I'll share the excerpt from his talk. Even if we receive him half-heartedly and reluctantly, he still receives us enthusiastically and non-grudgingly. You don't need to be afraid to receive him. You don't have to find the perfect way to receive him. If you move toward him at all, he will figure out how to move toward you, how he can work for you. He is the King of grace, and you can receive Christ in your own way. There is no one-size-fits-all Christian conversion. It can take many forms. For example, C.S. Lewis, when he was converted, it was really different. He is what he himself said. You must picture me alone in my room at college, night after night, feeling whenever my mind lifted for even a second from my work, the steady, unrelenting approach of him who I so earnestly desired not to meet. That which I greatly feared had last come upon me. In 1929, I gave in and admitted that God was God, and I knelt and prayed. That night, the most dejected and reluctant convert in all England. I did not then see what was the most obvious thing, the divine humility which will accept a convert even on such terms. The prodigal son at least walked home on his own 2 feet, but who can duly adore the love which will open the high gates to a prodigal who is brought in kicking, struggling, resentful, and darting eyes in every direction for a chance of escape? Some of us came to Christ that way. I came to Christ that way, and he found a way to make it work.